Marcus Thompson froze mid-swing, his sledgehammer suspended in the desert air as those amber eyes locked onto his through 6 months of dust and concrete debris. His coffee-stained work gloves trembled against the metal handle. This wasn't just another demolition cleanup. Something was alive down there. The German shepherd's gaze pierced through him with an intelligence that made his chest tighten, ears barely visible beneath chunks of rebar and drywall. Behind Marcus, his crew chief stumbled backward, hard hat clattering against broken foundation stones. "Jesus Christ, Thompson, how is that thing still breathing?" The dog's ribs showed through matted fur, yet those eyes held no surrender. Only a fierce protectiveness that reminded Marcus of his own mother's final hospital stare. He'd walked away from her bedside that day. He couldn't walk away from this. "Nobody moves!" Marcus shouted, though his voice cracked with something between command and plea. What had sustained this animal through Arizona's brutal summer heat, and what was it guarding so desperately in that concrete tomb? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Marcus Thompson had always believed that life dealt you one hand and you played it or folded. At 32, he'd been folding for the better part of 3 years. The divorce papers still sat unsigned on his kitchen counter, not because he wanted Rebecca back, but because signing them meant admitting he'd failed at the one thing his father had drilled into him since childhood. A man provides for his family, son. Everything else is just noise. The noise had gotten pretty loud lately. His Phoenix apartment was a studio barely large enough for his work boots and the stack of overdue bills that grew taller each month. 3 jobs kept him afloat: demolition work during the day, security guard on weekends, and landscaping whenever he could squeeze it in. His student loans from Arizona State's engineering program haunted him like ghosts, $87,000 worth of education that had landed him swinging sledgehammers instead of designing buildings. But it was honest work, and Marcus took pride in doing it right. Thompson Demolition might only have 5 employees and 2 trucks held together with prayer and duct tape, but they'd never had a safety violation or left a job half-finished. His crew respected him for that, even if respect didn't pay the bills. Margaret Sullivan had watched the world change from her kitchen window for 68 years. The Phoenix suburbs had sprawled toward her modest ranch house like desert wildflowers after rain, bringing young families with loud children and busy lives. Harold had loved the energy of it all before the cancer took him 3 years ago. Now the neighborhood felt like a movie playing outside her window, all sound and motion, but nothing she could touch. Her retirement from Phoenix General's pediatric ward had been supposed to be a celebration. 43 years of holding scared children's hands while doctors worked their magic, of being the steady voice that said, "Everything will be okay," when parents couldn't find their words. Instead, retirement felt like being benched from the only game she'd ever known how to play. The house felt too big with just her morning coffee ritual and the evening news. She'd kept Harold's reading chair exactly as he'd left it, his bookmark still marking page 247 of a Tom Clancy novel he'd never finish. Some nights she set 2 plates for dinner out of habit, realizing her mistake only when she reached for the salt. Harold Peterson had survived 3 tours in Vietnam and 40 years of Arizona heat, but loneliness was proving to be his toughest enemy yet. At 75, his days revolved around doctor appointments, grocery runs, and conversations with checkout clerks who called him sir, with the kind of polite distance reserved for relics. His trailer in the senior community felt like a foxhole sometimes, safe but isolated. The other residents were nice enough, but they talked about grandchildren and cruises, while Hank talked to the desert wind. His son lived in Seattle now, too busy with his own family to call more than twice a month. The September morning had started like any other demolition job. Marcus arrived at the Sunset Ridge development site at 6 a.m., the Arizona sun already promising another scorching day. The failed housing project stretched across 20 acres of desert scrubland, a monument to economic optimism that had crashed harder than the stock market. 37 houses in various stages of completion, abandoned when the developer's financing dried up and the contractors walked away. Marcus's crew had been working the site for 3 weeks, systematically tearing down what had never been finished. It was depressing work, destroying dreams before they'd had a chance to become homes. But the city wanted the eyesore cleared, and Thompson Demolition needed the contract. "Last building, boss," called out Jimmy Morales, his crew chief, as he fired up the excavator. "Then we can get the hell out of this ghost town." Marcus nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead as he surveyed the final structure. House number 37 was the largest of the development, a would-be mansion with Mediterranean styling that now looked more like ancient ruins. The partial roof had collapsed during a monsoon storm 6 months ago, leaving exposed beams and a jumble of concrete, drywall, and dreams. He was making his final safety inspection when he heard it. The sound was so faint he almost missed it beneath the rumble of diesel engines and the distant hum of morning traffic. A whimper. Soft, almost human, coming from somewhere deep within the rubble. Marcus held up his hand, signaling the crew to cut their engines. In the sudden silence, he heard it again, definitely animal, but with an intelligence that made the hair on his arms stand up. "You hear that?" Jimmy asked, stepping closer with a puzzled frown. "Yeah." Marcus grabbed his flashlight and approached the collapsed section of the house. The sound was coming from what had been the living room, now buried under tons of concrete and steel. "Something's alive in there." The beam of his flashlight cut through shadows and dust, probing the gaps between fallen beams. Most of the debris was too tightly packed to allow for much life, but there, in the far corner where a bathroom wall had created a natural lean-to, Marcus spotted movement. That's when he saw the eyes, amber-colored, intelligent, and fixed directly on him with an intensity that hit him like a physical blow. The German Shepherd was wedged into a space barely large enough for its body, surrounded by chunks of concrete and twisted rebar. Its black and tan coat was matted with dust and debris, ribs visible through the fur, but those eyes burned with a fierce determination that spoke of months of survival against impossible odds. "Holy shit," Jimmy breathed, peering over Marcus's shoulder. "How the hell is that dog still alive?" Marcus couldn't answer. He was transfixed by the animal's gaze, feeling something stir in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years, a connection, immediate and profound. The dog wasn't just looking at him, it was communicating something urgent, something that made every instinct in Marcus's body scream that this moment would change everything. "We need to get it out," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't explain. "Marcus, that whole section is unstable," Jimmy warned. "One wrong move and the rest of that roof comes down. We should call animal control." But even as Jimmy spoke, Marcus was stripping off his safety vest and hard hat. The dog's eyes never left his face, and in them he saw something that reminded him of his own reflection in the bathroom mirror each morning, the look of someone who had endured too much but refused to give up. "No time," Marcus said, though he couldn't explain how he knew. "It's been waiting for us." "For me?" He began carefully moving smaller pieces of debris, creating a path toward the trapped animal. Each piece he removed revealed more of the dog's incredible survival story. Somehow the collapse had created a small air pocket, and a broken water pipe had provided enough moisture to sustain life, but barely. As Marcus worked, the dog shifted position, and he caught sight of something that made his breath catch. Beneath the animal, protected by its body, was a small bundle wrapped in what looked like a baby blanket. The dog wasn't just surviving, it was protecting something. "Jimmy," Marcus called out, his voice tight with a growing sense of urgency. "Call 911. Tell them we need paramedics, animal control, and a structural engineer. And tell them—" He paused, staring into those amber eyes that seemed to hold secrets he couldn't yet comprehend. "Tell them it's a miracle." The German shepherd's tail moved slightly, not quite a wag, but an acknowledgement. As if it had been waiting 6 months for someone to understand that this wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something much larger than either of them could imagine. The Phoenix Fire Department's rescue team arrived within 12 minutes, but it felt like hours to Marcus as he maintained eye contact with the trapped German shepherd. Captain Rodriguez, a veteran of 23 years, took one look at the situation and shook his head. "This is gonna be delicate work," he told Marcus. "That whole section could pancake if we're not careful. What's the dog protecting down there?" "I'm not sure," Marcus replied, though his gut told him it was something precious. "But whatever it is, that dog's been keeping it safe for months." The rescue operation began with painstaking precision. Using hydraulic jacks and wooden cribbing, the team slowly stabilized the debris field while Marcus talked continuously to the dog whose eyes never wavered from his face. With each piece of concrete carefully lifted away, more of the animal's remarkable survival story emerged. "Look at this," called out firefighter Janet Walsh, pointing to scratches in the concrete. "The dog's been digging, creating drainage channels for rainwater. This animal's got engineering instincts." As they worked deeper into the pocket, the bundle beneath the dog became clearer. It was definitely fabric, pale blue baby blanket with white trim, carefully positioned and protected, but it was moving. Marcus's heart stopped. "There's something alive in there." Captain Rodriguez immediately called for additional paramedics. "If there's an infant involved, this changes everything. We need pediatric support, now." The next hour unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between hope and disaster. Every movement had to be calculated, every piece of debris tested for stability before removal. The German shepherd, who the rescue team had started calling Guardian, remained perfectly still, as if understanding that patience was the difference between life and death. "Doctor." Elizabeth Crawford arrived as part of the pediatric emergency team, her silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun that spoke of decades in emergency medicine. But when she saw the situation, a dog that had somehow kept something alive in conditions that should have been fatal, her composed professional demeanor cracked slightly. "In 30 years of pediatric emergency medicine, I've never seen anything like this," she murmured to Marcus. "If there's really a living child under there—" "There is," Marcus said with absolute certainty, though he couldn't explain how he knew. "Guardian's been waiting for us to find them." As the rescue team created a large enough opening, Guardian finally allowed Marcus to approach. The dog's breathing was shallow, its body clearly at the limits of endurance, but its protective instincts remained sharp. When Marcus reached toward the bundle, Guardian's amber eyes searched his face one more time, as if making a final assessment of trust. "It's okay, boy," Marcus whispered. "I've got them now." What they found defied every medical expectation. Wrapped in the baby blanket was an infant, approximately 6 months old, dehydrated and malnourished but alive. The baby's skin was pale but warm, breathing steady, eyes alert and responsive. "This is impossible," Dr. Crawford breathed as she began her preliminary examination. "No infant should survive these conditions for more than a few days, let alone months." But Guardian had made the impossible possible. The dog had somehow shared its meager water supply with the child, had used its body heat to regulate temperature, had created a micro-environment where life could endure against all odds. The baby's diaper had been changed. Guardian had somehow figured out how to use scraps of fabric. Food remnants suggested the dog had regurgitated partially digested meals to keep the infant nourished. As paramedics prepared to transport both Guardian and the baby to Phoenix General Hospital, Detective Ray Morrison arrived to begin his investigation. A 20-year veteran of missing persons cases, Morrison had seen his share of the impossible, but this left him speechless. "We need to identify this child," he told Marcus, "and figure out how they ended up here. The building collapsed 6 months ago during that monsoon storm. If they've been here since then—" "The dog saved them," Marcus said simply. "Guardian saved them both." As they loaded Guardian onto a specialized animal transport stretcher, the dog's eyes found Marcus one more time. There was something in that gaze. Gratitude, yes, but also a deeper communication that Marcus felt in his bones. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The baby, who had remained remarkably calm throughout the rescue, was secured in a pediatric transport unit. Dr. Crawford rode with them to the hospital, but not before pulling Marcus aside. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer," she said, her voice unusually intense. "When you look at this child, do you feel anything familiar?" Marcus stared at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes," Dr. Crawford said carefully, "the heart recognizes what the mind hasn't figured out yet." At Phoenix General Hospital, Guardian was immediately taken to the veterinary trauma unit while the baby was rushed to pediatric intensive care. Marcus found himself caught between two waiting rooms, unable to choose which crisis demanded his attention more. That's when he met Margaret Sullivan. Maggie had been volunteering in the pediatric ward for 6 months, ever since retirement had left her with too much time and not enough purpose. When word spread about the miracle rescue, she was among the first to offer help. 43 years in pediatrics, she told Marcus as they sat in the waiting room. "I've seen a lot of children come through these doors, but this one, there's something special about this baby." Hours later, Harold Peterson arrived. The Vietnam veteran had heard about the rescue on the news and felt compelled to visit. "That dog," he told Marcus, his weathered hands shaking slightly, "reminds me of the K-9 units in Vietnam, dogs that would die before abandoning their mission." As night fell over Phoenix, 3 strangers found themselves bonded by circumstances none of them could have imagined 12 hours earlier. Marcus, the man who had given up on meaningful connections. Maggie, the woman whose nurturing instincts had been left idle. Hank, the veteran who understood the meaning of loyalty and sacrifice. And somewhere in the hospital, Guardian and the baby fought their separate battles for recovery, while the biggest questions remained unanswered. Who was this child? How had they ended up in that collapsed building? And why did Marcus feel like his entire life had been leading to this moment? The first 72 hours at Phoenix General Hospital passed in a blur of medical procedures, police interviews, and media attention that Marcus never could have anticipated. By the second day, news vans lined the hospital parking lot, and reporters thrust microphones at anyone who might have information about the miracle baby and guardian angel dog. Marcus had taken emergency leave from Thompson Demolition, something he couldn't afford financially but couldn't avoid emotionally. Every time he tried to leave the hospital, something pulled him back. Guardian remained in critical condition in the veterinary wing, while the baby, now temporarily named Tommy by the nursing staff, showed remarkable resilience in the pediatric ICU. "You need to go home and sleep," Maggie told him on the 3rd day, finding him hunched over a cup of vending machine coffee at 2 a.m. "You look like death warmed over." "Can't," Marcus replied, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "What if something happens? What if Guardian needs—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the irrational fear that leaving would somehow break the invisible thread connecting him to both the dog and the baby. Maggie sat beside him, her nurse's instincts kicking in. "Honey, I've been around enough families in crisis to recognize the signs. You're not just concerned about Guardian and Tommy, you're connected to them in a way that goes deeper than rescue. Detective Morrison's investigation had yielded more questions than answers. The building's collapse 6 months earlier had been attributed to structural defects exacerbated by an unusually severe monsoon. The construction company had declared bankruptcy shortly after, leaving behind incomplete records and vanished workers. "We've run the baby's information through every missing persons database in the Southwest," Morrison told Marcus during one of their daily meetings. Nothing. No reports of missing infants matching his description, no abandoned car reports from that time period. It's like he materialized out of thin air. The lack of identification meant Tommy had become a ward of the state, with Child Protective Services monitoring his care. Social worker Linda Reeves was a kind woman, but she operated within a system that didn't account for miracle rescues or the emotional bonds that had formed around this case. "Mr. Thompson," she explained gently, "I understand you feel responsible for Tommy and Guardian, but once they're both healthy, we'll need to find appropriate placements. Guardian will go to animal rescue, and Tommy will enter the foster care system until we can identify his family or find permanent placement." The thought of separation hit Marcus like a physical blow. They can't be split up. Guardian saved that baby's life. "They belong together." "I appreciate the sentiment," Reeves replied, "but legally there's no precedent for what you're suggesting. We can't place a child based on emotional attachment to an animal." Harold Peterson had become a daily fixture in the hospital, initially drawn by curiosity about Guardian, but increasingly invested in the human drama unfolding around the rescue. His military background gave him a unique perspective on loyalty and sacrifice that resonated with the story. "That dog reminds me of a German shepherd named Duke we had in my unit," Hank told Marcus one afternoon as they watched Guardian through the veterinary ICU window. "Took shrapnel in his hindquarters during a firefight but refused to leave our wounded radio man. Stayed with him for 18 hours until the medevac arrived." Guardian was improving slowly. The veterinary team, led by Dr. Amanda Price, had initially been pessimistic about the dog's chances. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, and infected wounds from the debris should have been fatal, but Guardian's will to live seemed to defy medical expectations. "It's the damnedest thing," Dr. Price confided to Marcus. "His vitals improve every time someone brings news about the baby. It's like he won't allow himself to fully recover until he knows Tommy is safe." The media attention brought both blessings and complications. A GoFundMe campaign started by a Phoenix news anchor raised $50,000 in the first week, covering Guardian's veterinary bills and Tommy's ongoing medical care. But it also attracted attention from people with their own agendas. On day 5, a woman named Carol Hendricks appeared at the hospital claiming to be Tommy's grandmother. She brought a photo of a young woman who bore a resemblance to how Tommy might look as an adult, but her story had inconsistencies that made Detective Morrison suspicious. "She says her daughter Sarah ran away 8 months ago and was pregnant," Morrison explained to Marcus privately. "But she can't produce any documentation, and her timeline doesn't match. I think she's trying to cash in on the publicity." More concerning was the appearance of representatives from 3 different animal rescue organizations, each claiming they could provide the best home for Guardian. Some offered substantial donations to the hospital in exchange for custody rights, turning Guardian's recovery into a bidding war that disgusted Marcus. "He's not a commodity," Marcus told Dr. Crawford during one of his daily visits to check on Tommy. "Guardian chose to save that baby. Doesn't that count for something?" Dr. Crawford had been unusually attentive to both Tommy and Guardian's cases, often staying late to check on their progress. There was something in her eyes when she looked at Tommy, a recognition that went beyond professional interest. "Mr. Thompson," she said carefully, "have you considered the possibility that Guardian's attachment to Tommy isn't random? Animals have instincts about people, especially children. Sometimes they recognize connections that humans miss. The breakthrough came on day 7, when Guardian finally showed enough improvement to move from the ICU to a regular recovery room. Marcus was present when the veterinary team transferred the dog to a larger space with windows overlooking the hospital's courtyard. For the first time since the rescue, Guardian's tail wagged weakly when he saw Marcus. But more significantly, when a nurse wheeled Tommy's portable incubator past the window during a routine transport to the radiology department, Guardian struggled to stand and pressed his nose against the glass. "Did you see that?" Dr. Price asked excitedly. "That's the strongest response we've seen from him." His heart rate spiked, but in a positive way. It's like seeing Tommy gave him a reason to fight harder. Maggie witnessed the moment and felt something shift in her understanding of the situation. In all my years in pediatrics, I've seen how children respond to therapy animals, but I've never seen this kind of mutual recognition between a dog and an infant. It's like they're family. The comment sparked an idea that had been growing in Marcus's mind since the rescue. That evening he approached Dr. Crawford with a proposition that surprised even him. "I want to apply to foster Tommy," he announced, "and I want Guardian to be part of the arrangement." Dr. Crawford studied him carefully. "Marcus, fostering is a serious commitment. You're a single man working multiple jobs. The state will want to see stability, financial security, a suitable home environment." "Then help me make it work," Marcus replied. "You've been around Tommy more than anyone except the nursing staff. You've seen how he responds to people, how alert and aware he is, and you've seen what Guardian did to keep him alive. They belong together, and I need to be part of that." The truth was more complicated than Marcus could articulate. From the moment he'd looked into Guardian's eyes in that rubble, he'd felt a pull he couldn't explain. And watching Tommy in the hospital, seeing the baby's bright eyes track movement and respond to voices, Marcus felt something awakening in him that had been dormant since his divorce, the desire to protect, to nurture, to build something meaningful. Hank overheard the conversation and surprised everyone by offering his support. "If Marcus needs character references or help with the paperwork, count me in. Hell, if he needs help with childcare, I raised 2 boys of my own." Maggie was equally enthusiastic. "I've got 43 years of pediatric experience and all the time in the world since retirement. If the state needs assurance that Tommy would have proper care, I can provide that." Dr. Crawford listened to their impromptu planning session with an expression that mixed hope with concern. "There's something I need to tell you all," she said finally. "Something about Tommy that might change everything." She led them to her office and closed the door, then pulled out a file she'd been keeping separate from Tommy's official medical records. "I've been running some additional tests on Tommy with the court's permission," she began. "DNA analysis, genetic markers, blood typing. The results? They're interesting." Marcus felt his heart racing. "What kind of interesting?" "The kind that suggests Tommy isn't just any abandoned baby," Dr. Crawford replied. "His genetic profile shows markers that are relatively uncommon, and his blood type, combined with some physical characteristics." She paused, studying Marcus's face. "I think we need to run a comparison test." "Comparison with what?" Maggie asked. Dr. Crawford's next words hit the room like lightning. "With Marcus. Because unless I'm very much mistaken, Tommy isn't just the baby Guardian saved. He's Marcus's son." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis as memories he'd tried to suppress came flooding back. Sarah Martinez, the brief relationship 8 months ago, her sudden disappearance without explanation, the messages he'd sent that went unanswered. "That's impossible," he whispered. But even as he said it, he was remembering Sarah's frightened eyes the last time he'd seen her. The way she'd avoided talking about the future, her insistence that she needed to figure some things out on her own. "There's only one way to be certain," Dr. Crawford said gently. "Are you willing to take a paternity test?" Outside the office window, Guardian lay sleeping in his recovery room, and 3 floors up, Tommy dozed peacefully in the pediatric ward. 3 lives that had somehow found each other in the ruins of a collapsed building, guided by instincts and connections that defied explanation. Marcus looked at Maggie and Hank, these 2 strangers who had become his unexpected allies. Then back at Dr. Crawford. "Yes," he said simply. "Let's find out the truth." The DNA results took 3 agonizing days to process, during which Marcus barely slept or ate. He found himself alternating between Guardian's recovery room and Tommy's pediatric ward, as if proximity could somehow influence the outcome of tests that would either confirm his deepest suspicions or leave him back where he started, a man whose life had been accidentally intersected by miracle and tragedy. On Tuesday morning, Dr. Crawford called him into her office with an expression that gave nothing away. Detective Morrison was there, too, along with Linda Reeves from Child Protective Services. The official nature of the meeting made Marcus's stomach clench with anxiety. "The results are conclusive," Dr. Crawford said without preamble. "Marcus, you are Tommy's biological father. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. The words hit him like a physical blow. Marcus gripped the arms of his chair, feeling lightheaded as 8 months of suppressed memories crashed over him like a dam bursting. Sarah Martinez, beautiful, scared Sarah who had worked at the coffee shop near his apartment. Their brief but intense relationship had ended abruptly when she'd simply vanished one day, leaving only a note saying she needed to figure things out and couldn't be with him anymore. "She was pregnant," Marcus whispered, the pieces finally clicking into place. "She was pregnant and didn't tell me." Detective Morrison leaned forward, his notebook ready. "We need to know everything you can tell us about Sarah Martinez, her full name, age, where she worked, any family members you might have met. This could be the key to understanding how Tommy ended up in that building." The story poured out of Marcus in fragments. Sarah, 23 years old, had been working at Desert Bloom Coffee on Central Avenue while taking night classes at Phoenix Community College. She'd been guarded about her past, mentioning only that she'd grown up in foster care and had no close family. Their relationship had been passionate but complicated. Sarah would disappear for days at a time, claiming she needed space to think. She was scared of something, Marcus remembered. Or someone. She never wanted to stay at my place overnight, always insisted on meeting in public places. I thought she was just cautious because of bad experiences with men before. Linda Reeves took careful notes, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "Mr. Thompson, given this new information, your petition to foster Tommy takes on an entirely different dimension. As his biological father, you have legal rights that supersede the state's placement authority. However, we'll need to conduct a full home study and background check." "There's something else," Dr. Crawford interjected, producing another file. "I took the liberty of researching Sarah Martinez based on the information you provided. Marcus, I'm afraid I have difficult news." She opened the file to reveal a death certificate dated 6 months earlier. Sarah Elena Martinez, age 23, deceased in the Sunset Ridge Development Building collapse. Listed cause of death, blunt force trauma and exposure. Marcus felt the world spin around him. She was in the building when it collapsed. She was there with Tommy. According to the construction crew's testimony from that day, the building came down during the worst monsoon storm of the season, Detective Morrison explained. High winds, driving rain, zero visibility. If someone was taking shelter in the building, the implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah had been seeking shelter from the storm, possibly giving birth or having recently given birth, when the building collapsed around them. Somehow, in her final moments, she had managed to place Tommy where Guardian could protect him, and the dog had honored that trust for 6 months. Guardian found them both, Marcus said, his voice breaking with the weight of realization. He saved Tommy, but he couldn't save Sarah. Dr. Crawford nodded gravely. Based on the positioning where you found them and Guardian's protective behavior, I believe Sarah deliberately placed Tommy in the dog's care before she died. Guardian has been fulfilling a dying mother's last wish. The next 24 hours brought a whirlwind of legal procedures, media management, and emotional reckoning. News of Marcus's paternity broke despite the family's attempts at privacy, turning an already intense story into a national phenomenon. Miracle Reunion began trending on social media, with thousands of people following the story of the father, son, and guardian dog brought together by tragedy and sustained by love. Maggie stepped into her self-appointed role as family coordinator with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades managing crisis situations. "The reporters are vultures," she told Marcus bluntly. "You need to control this narrative before it controls you. And more importantly, you need to focus on what matters, bringing your son and guardian home." The legal complexities were daunting. While Marcus's paternity gave him rights to Tommy, the state still required proof of his ability to provide adequate care. His financial situation, 3 jobs and a studio apartment, didn't paint a picture of stability that impressed social services. That's when Hank surprised everyone with an offer that changed everything. "I've got a 4-bedroom house sitting mostly empty since my wife passed," the veteran announced during one of their daily hospital meetings. "It's got a big yard, quiet neighborhood, perfect for raising a child. Marcus, you and Tommy move in with me. I'll help with childcare. You help with the bills and maintenance. We'll be roommates." "Hank, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. Hell, I'm insisting." Hank's weathered face was set with determination. "That boy's going to need stability, and Guardian's going to need space to recover. Plus, I could use the company. Win-win all around." Maggie was equally committed to the unconventional family arrangement. "I'll provide childcare during your work hours. Between my nursing background and Hank's experience raising boys, Tommy will have better care than most children get from traditional 2-parent homes." The team they were forming defied every conventional family model, but it worked on paper and felt right in practice. Linda Reeves conducted her home study at Hank's ranch-style house in Ahwatukee and found it more than adequate for a child. The veteran's spotless military record and Maggie's professional credentials provided character references that satisfied even the most stringent requirements. Guardian's recovery accelerated once the legal arrangements began falling into place. Dr. Price noted that the dog's improvement seemed directly correlated with increased visits from Marcus and proximity to Tommy during the baby's routine transports through the hospital. "It's remarkable," she told Marcus. "Guardian seems to understand that the pack is coming together. His stress indicators have normalized, his appetite has returned, and he's showing interest in physical therapy. It's like he knows his job isn't finished yet." The climactic moment came on a Thursday afternoon when Guardian was finally cleared for short visits outside his recovery room. Dr. Price and the nursing staff arranged for Tommy to be brought to Guardian's room for their first intentional reunion since the rescue. Marcus held Tommy while Guardian, still weak but alert, approached slowly. The baby's eyes, which Marcus now recognized as a mirror of his own, tracked the dog's movement with obvious recognition. When Guardian gently nuzzled Tommy's tiny hand, the baby's fingers closed around the dog's ear with surprising strength. "They remember each other," Maggie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "After everything they've been through, they still know they belong together." Hank, who had maintained his tough veteran exterior through most of the ordeal, broke down completely. 47 years since Vietnam, and I thought I'd seen everything about loyalty and sacrifice. But this is something else entirely. Dr. Crawford watched the reunion with professional fascination and personal emotion. In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen a bond like this. It transcends species, circumstances, even death. Sarah's final act created something beautiful. The legal paperwork was expedited with surprising efficiency. Marcus's paternity, combined with the unique circumstances and the support system he'd assembled, satisfied every requirement for custody. Tommy would come home with his father, accompanied by guardian and surrounded by the chosen family they'd all somehow found in each other. But the most significant moment came when Marcus was alone with Tommy in the pediatric ward, holding his son for the first time with full knowledge of their relationship. Looking into those familiar eyes, he felt a connection that went beyond genetics or circumstances. "Your mom loved you enough to save you," he whispered to Tommy. "And I promise I'll love you enough to give you the life she wanted for you. We're going to be okay, son. All of us." Guardian, lying nearby in his portable bed, thumped his tail weakly against the blanket. The dog's amber eyes held the same intelligence and determination that had first captured Marcus's attention in the rubble. But now they also held something new: peace. His mission was evolving from survival to family, from protection to love. As discharge day approached, the unlikely family prepared for their new life together. Marcus quit 2 of his 3 jobs, keeping only the demolition work which paid enough to cover his share of expenses at Hank's house. Maggie arranged her volunteer schedule around Tommy's needs, and Hank began baby-proofing his house with the enthusiasm of a man who had found purpose again. The media attention continued, but they had learned to manage it as a team. Their story had touched something deep in the national consciousness: the idea that families could be formed by choice and circumstance, that love could transcend tragedy, and that sometimes the most beautiful endings grew from the most impossible beginnings. Guardian's final medical clearance came on a sunny Friday morning. As they loaded the dog into Hank's pickup truck for the ride to their new home, Marcus reflected on how completely his life had changed in 2 weeks. From a man with no meaningful connections to the father of a miracle baby, surrounded by a family he never could have imagined. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and challenges they would face together. The first month at Hank's house felt like living in a fairy tale that Marcus kept waiting to end. Tommy thrived in the stable environment, his development accelerating under the constant attention of 3 devoted adults and 1 protective German shepherd. Guardian had claimed a spot beside Tommy's crib and rarely left the baby's side, as if understanding that his primary mission had evolved from survival to guardianship. But fairy tales, Marcus learned, don't account for the complexities of real life, and the challenges began mounting with devastating swiftness. The first crisis came in the form of a certified letter delivered on a Tuesday morning. Carol Hendricks, the woman who had originally claimed to be Tommy's grandmother, had retained a lawyer and was challenging Marcus's custody. Her attorney argued that Marcus's paternity was irrelevant since he had abandoned Sarah during her pregnancy and failed to provide support for his child. "This is bullshit," Marcus told his own lawyer, David Chen, during their emergency meeting. "I never knew Sarah was pregnant. She disappeared without telling me anything." "I believe you," Chen replied. "But proving abandonment versus ignorance can be legally complex. Ms. Hendricks is claiming she has documentation proving Sarah tried to contact you about the pregnancy and that you refused involvement. The documentation turned out to be fabricated, poorly forged text messages and fake medical records that Detective Morrison quickly exposed. But the legal challenge drained resources Marcus couldn't afford and created a cloud of uncertainty that affected everyone in their makeshift family. Maggie found herself testifying in court about her observations of Marcus's relationship with Tommy, while Hank provided character testimony that painted Marcus as a dedicated father and responsible man. But the proceedings were public, and the media attention intensified to an unbearable level. Reporters camped outside Hank's house, shoving cameras and microphones at anyone who entered or left. Tommy couldn't be taken for walks without risk of being photographed, and Guardian became increasingly agitated by the constant presence of strangers near his territory. The stress began taking its toll on everyone. Marcus lost weight and sleep, often staying awake all night researching legal precedents and reviewing case documents. Maggie's blood pressure spiked to dangerous levels, forcing her to cut back on her help with Tommy. Hank's arthritis flared from the tension, making it difficult for him to assist with childcare duties. But the most heartbreaking change was in Guardian himself. The dog, who had been steadily recovering his strength and spirits, began showing signs of severe anxiety. He stopped eating regularly, started pacing obsessively, and developed a protective aggression toward strangers that concerned Dr. Price. Guardian's exhibiting classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress, the veterinarian explained during an emergency consultation. The media circus is triggering his survival instincts. He thinks his family is under threat again. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when Guardian attacked a photographer who had climbed over Hank's fence to get closer shots of Tommy playing in the backyard. The dog's protective instincts overrode his normally gentle nature, and the photographer required 6 stitches in his arm. "We could be looking at a dangerous dog designation," Chen warned Marcus. "If Guardian is labeled aggressive, it could affect your custody case. The court might decide that having him around Tommy constitutes a risk." The irony was devastating. Guardian, who had saved Tommy's life and protected him for 6 months, might be forced away from the child he loved because of his devotion to that same protection. Carol Hendricks's lawyer immediately seized on the incident, filing motions to have Guardian removed from the home and arguing that Marcus's inability to control the dog demonstrated his unfitness as a parent. The legal attacks felt like a coordinated assault designed to tear apart everything they had built. Marcus found himself facing an impossible choice: fight to keep Guardian and risk losing Tommy, or surrender the dog to protect his rights as a father. The decision tore at him, especially when he saw Tommy reaching for Guardian during their forced separations, the baby's distress obvious whenever his protector was absent. The community support that had initially buoyed their spirits began to fracture under the pressure. While many people continued to support Marcus and his unusual family, others began questioning whether a single father working in demolition could provide adequate stability for a child with such a traumatic beginning. Local news segments featured debates about unconventional families, with child welfare experts arguing both sides of the case. Some praised the loving environment Marcus had created, while others worried about the long-term effects of a household built around trauma bonding rather than traditional family structures. "Maybe I'm being selfish," Marcus confided to Dr. Crawford during one of Tommy's routine checkups. "Maybe Tommy would be better off with a traditional family, 2 parents, financial stability, a normal life." Dr. Crawford, who had been quietly monitoring the situation, surprised him with the intensity of her response. "Marcus, I've been working with children for 3 decades. I've seen traditional families that were disasters and unconventional families that were miracles. What Tommy has with you, Maggie, Hank, and Guardian isn't just love, it's the kind of fierce protection and dedication that most children never experience." But even her reassurance couldn't ease the growing pressure. The legal bills were mounting beyond Marcus's ability to pay, even with the money from the GoFundMe campaign. Hank had quietly mortgaged his house to help with expenses, though he tried to hide this from Marcus. Maggie had dipped into her retirement savings to cover Guardian's ongoing veterinary care. The weight of everyone's sacrifices pressed down on Marcus like the concrete that had once trapped Guardian and Tommy. He began to understand how people could be crushed not by catastrophic events, but by the slow accumulation of smaller crises that gradually overwhelmed their ability to cope. The nadir came on a Sunday evening when Tommy developed a high fever that spiked to 104 degrees. The rush to the emergency room, the hours of uncertainty while doctors ran tests, the fear that everything they had fought for might be lost to a simple childhood illness, it all converged into a perfect storm of terror and exhaustion. Guardian, who was not allowed in the hospital, waited in the parking lot in Hank's truck, his anxiety palpable. Through the hospital windows, Marcus could see the dog pacing and whining, sensing that his charge was in distress but unable to reach him. Tommy's fever broke after 6 hours, diagnosed as a common viral infection that would pass with rest and medication, but the incident highlighted how fragile their situation really was. One serious illness, one legal setback, one media scandal could destroy everything they had built. As they drove home at dawn, Tommy sleeping peacefully in his car seat and Guardian finally calm beside him, Marcus made a decision that felt like surrender, but might have been wisdom. "I'm going to call Chen tomorrow," he told Hank quietly. "I'm going to ask about plea options. Maybe if I agree to some concessions with the Hendricks woman, we can end this nightmare." Hank was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Son, sometimes strategic retreat isn't giving up. Sometimes it's the smartest thing a soldier can do." But as they pulled into the driveway, Guardian suddenly became alert, his ears pricked and his body tense. Something was different. Something was about to change everything again. The house that had been their sanctuary was about to become the setting for revelations that would either destroy them completely or provide the truth they needed to finally find peace. Dr. Elizabeth Crawford sat in her car outside Hank's house for 20 minutes before finding the courage to knock on the door. The manila envelope on her passenger seat contained documents that would either destroy Marcus's world or save it, and she wasn't sure which outcome terrified her more. For 6 weeks she had wrestled with information that could change everything, but Carol Hendricks's increasingly aggressive legal attacks had forced her hand. When Marcus answered the door, still wearing scrubs from Tommy's late-night hospital visit, Elizabeth saw the exhaustion etched in every line of his face. Behind him, Guardian stood alert, sensing the significance of this unexpected visitor. "Dr. Crawford, is everything okay? Is it about Tommy's fever?" "May I come in, Marcus? There's something we need to discuss. All of you need to hear this." Within minutes, their makeshift family had assembled in Hank's living room. Tommy slept peacefully in his carrier, blissfully unaware that his future hung in the balance. Maggie sat beside Marcus, her nurse's instincts already reading the gravity in Elizabeth's expression. Hank positioned himself near the window, his military training making him unconsciously check escape routes. "I haven't been entirely honest with any of you," Elizabeth began, her voice trembling slightly. "My interest in Tommy's case goes beyond professional obligation. Sarah Martinez wasn't just another patient to me. She was my niece." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Marcus felt his vision blur as the implications crashed over him. "Your niece? But you never said... Why didn't you tell us?" Elizabeth opened the envelope with shaking hands, pulling out photographs and documents she had been hiding for months. "Because I was protecting her, even after her death. Sarah had been running from something, someone, and she made me promise never to reveal our relationship unless Tommy's life depended on it." The photographs showed a young Sarah with Elizabeth at various family gatherings, dating back years. Medical records revealed that Elizabeth had been Sarah's emergency contact, that she had known about the pregnancy from the beginning, and most shocking of all, that she had been searching for Marcus for months before the building collapse. Sarah was terrified, Elizabeth continued, her professional composure cracking. She wanted to tell you about the baby, Marcus, but she was being stalked by her foster father, a man named Vincent Hayes. He had been abusing her since she was 14, and when she finally escaped his household at 18, he wouldn't let go. Detective Morrison, who had been quietly investigating Carol Hendricks's claims, had discovered connections that painted an even darker picture. Hayes had been tracking Sarah for years, using private investigators and manipulation to control her life from a distance. When Sarah became pregnant and tried to build a normal relationship with Marcus, Hayes had escalated his campaign of terror. "The night Sarah disappeared from your life," Elizabeth revealed, producing a stack of threatening letters, "Hayes had found her again. He told her that if she didn't break off all contact with you and disappear, he would hurt you too. Sarah sacrificed her happiness to protect you and the baby." The letters were chilling in their specificity. Hayes had detailed Marcus's daily routines, his work schedule, even his financial struggles. The threats weren't just against Sarah. They included graphic descriptions of what Hayes would do to Marcus and their unborn child if Sarah didn't comply with his demands. She spent months hiding in shelters, moving constantly, always looking over her shoulder, Elizabeth continued. The night of the monsoon, she was trying to reach the bus station when the storm hit. The building collapse wasn't an accident of circumstance. She was there because she was running for her life. Maggie gasped, covering her mouth as the full horror of Sarah's situation became clear. "That poor girl. She died trying to protect her baby and his father." But Elizabeth wasn't finished with her revelations. The most devastating truth was still to come. "Carol Hendricks isn't just some opportunist trying to cash in on Tommy's story," she said quietly. "She's Vincent Hayes' sister. This entire custody challenge has been orchestrated by the man who terrorized Sarah and drove her into hiding." The room fell into stunned silence. Marcus felt reality shifting beneath him as he processed the magnitude of the deception. The woman who had been fighting to take Tommy away wasn't motivated by concern for the child. She was working with the predator who had destroyed Sarah's life. "Hayes couldn't get to Sarah anymore, but he found another way to control her legacy," Elizabeth explained. "If he can't have Sarah, he'll take her son. Carol is his proxy, using the legal system to finish what he started." Detective Morrison had been building a case against Hayes for months, but proving his connection to Carol Hendricks and their conspiracy to gain custody of Tommy required evidence that had been carefully hidden. Elizabeth's documents provided the missing pieces, but they also revealed why she had waited so long to come forward. "I was scared," she admitted. "Hayes has connections, money, influence. I thought if I stayed quiet and helped from the shadows, I could protect Tommy without putting anyone else at risk. But watching this legal battle destroy your family, I realized my silence was just another form of the fear that killed my niece." The evidence Elizabeth provided was overwhelming. Phone records showing coordination between Hayes and Carol Hendricks, financial documents revealing that Hayes was funding the custody challenge. Most damning of all, recorded conversations where Hayes explicitly discussed his plans to gain control of Sarah's mistake and use the child to finally own some part of the woman who had escaped him. Guardian knew, Marcus realized suddenly, looking at the German shepherd, who had been unusually agitated whenever Carol Hendricks appeared in court. He could smell Hayes on her. That's why he's been so protective, so anxious. He's been trying to warn us. Dr. Price's assessment of Guardian's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. The dog wasn't suffering from simple PTSD. He was responding to an active threat that the humans around him couldn't perceive. His protective instincts hadn't been damaged by trauma. They had been honed by it. The legal implications were staggering. David Chin immediately filed motions to dismiss Carol Hendricks's custody challenge and launched a countersuit based on fraud and conspiracy. But more importantly, the revelation shifted the entire narrative of Tommy's story from a custody dispute to a tale of survival against a predator who refused to let his victims go, even in death. The media, which had been portraying the case as a debate about unconventional families, pivoted to cover it as a crime story with clear villains and heroes. Public sympathy, which had been divided, now rallied overwhelmingly behind Marcus and his family. The GoFundMe campaign, which had stagnated under negative publicity, suddenly surged past $300,000 as people across the country donated to support Tommy's legal defense. But the most profound impact was emotional. Marcus finally understood why Sarah had left so abruptly, why she had seemed so frightened in their final conversations, why she had been so reluctant to talk about the future. She hadn't abandoned him. She had sacrificed herself to protect him and their unborn child. "She loved you," Elizabeth told Marcus as they sat together watching Tommy sleep. "Even at the end, hiding in that building, she was still trying to protect your family. She taught Guardian your scent from clothes she had kept. She prepared him to find you when the time came." The revelation explained Guardian's instant recognition of Marcus in the rubble, his immediate trust and protective behavior. Sarah had spent her final months training the dog to recognize and protect the father of her child, creating a living bridge between Marcus and the son he didn't know existed. "She never stopped loving you," Elizabeth continued, "but she loved you enough to let you go rather than put you in danger. And in the end, she found a way to bring you back together anyway." Vincent Hayes was arrested within 48 hours of Elizabeth's revelations. The evidence against him included not just the conspiracy to manipulate Tommy's custody case, but years of documented stalking, harassment, and abuse. Carol Hendricks, faced with prosecution as his accomplice, agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for reduced charges. The custody challenge evaporated overnight. With Hayes in jail and his conspiracy exposed, there were no remaining legal obstacles to Marcus's parental rights. Tommy was officially and permanently his son, with no further challenges possible. Guardian's transformation was immediate and remarkable. Within days of Hayes's arrest, the dog's anxiety disappeared. He resumed eating normally, stopped his obsessive pacing, and returned to the gentle, intelligent animal he had been before the legal crisis began. It was as if he had finally completed the mission Sarah had given him, to protect Tommy until his real family could be safely reunited. The community that had rallied around their story now understood the full scope of what they had accomplished. This wasn't just about a man finding his son or a dog saving a baby. It was about love triumphing over evil, about chosen families standing against forces that sought to destroy them, about the power of truth to overcome even the most sophisticated deceptions. But perhaps most importantly, it was about Sarah's final victory over the man who had tried to control her life. Through Guardian and Tommy, through Marcus and the family he had built, she had ensured that love would have the last word in a story that had begun with fear and manipulation. As Elizabeth prepared to leave that night, she handed Marcus one final item. A letter Sarah had written to him just days before her death, kept sealed until Tommy's safety was assured. "She wanted you to know," Elizabeth said simply, "that none of this was your fault, and that she never regretted loving you, even when that love cost her everything." The truth had finally set them all free. But the real test would come in learning how to build a future worthy of the sacrifices that had made it possible. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday morning in March, Marcus stood in the backyard of what was now officially their family home, watching Tommy take his first tentative steps across the grass. The 1-year-old wobbled uncertainly for 3 steps before tumbling into Guardian's waiting embrace, both boy and dog dissolving into the kind of joyful chaos that had become the soundtrack of their daily lives. "Did you see that?" Maggie called from the kitchen window, where she was preparing Tommy's birthday cake. "3 whole steps. At this rate, we'll be chasing him around the neighborhood by summer." Hank, who had been teaching Tommy to say "Grandpa" for weeks, clapped his weathered hands together in delight. "That's my boy! You show that grass who's boss." The transformation in all their lives had been profound. Marcus had used part of the legal settlement from Vincent Hayes to pay off his student loans and start his own construction company, specializing in disaster cleanup and recovery. The work felt meaningful now, helping other families rebuild from tragedy instead of just tearing down failed dreams. Maggie had officially moved into the guest house that Hank had built in his backyard, creating a multi-generational household that somehow worked better than any traditional family arrangement Marcus had ever witnessed. Her nursing background proved invaluable, not just for Tommy's care, but for managing Hank's occasional health issues and providing the emotional stability that held their unconventional family together. The birthday party was a modest affair, but it represented something extraordinary. The first time Tommy would celebrate surrounded by people who chose to love him rather than people who were obligated by blood or law. Dr. Elizabeth Crawford arrived early, bringing both medical expertise and the family history that Tommy would need as he grew older. Detective Morrison stopped by with his wife and kids, the children immediately gravitating toward Guardian, who had learned to balance his protective instincts with his natural gentleness around small humans. "I can't believe it's been a year since we found him," Marcus told Elizabeth as they watched Tommy discover that Guardian's tail made an excellent handle for pulling himself upright. "Some days it feels like yesterday, and other days it feels like he's always been part of our lives." Elizabeth smiled, but there was something bittersweet in her expression. Sarah would have loved this. She always talked about wanting Tommy to grow up surrounded by people who would choose him every day, not just accept him as an obligation. The letter Sarah had written to Marcus, read and reread dozens of times over the past months, had become a roadmap for the kind of father he wanted to be. In it, she had shared her dreams for their son, that he would grow up brave but kind, confident but humble, surrounded by adults who would teach him that love was a choice made daily, not just a feeling that happened by accident. "I want him to know he was wanted," Sarah had written, "not just by me, but by you, if you ever get the chance to know him. I want him to understand that sometimes the best families are the ones we build rather than the ones we're born into. And I want him to know that Guardian isn't just his protector. He's his brother, chosen by love rather than genetics." Tommy's first word had been guard, his baby pronunciation of Guardian's name, which had reduced all 4 adults to tears and prompted Hank to declare it the greatest milestone in child development history. The bond between boy and dog had only strengthened as Tommy grew, with Guardian serving as everything from jungle gym to security blanket to co-conspirator in the kind of innocent mischief that made parenthood both exhausting and magical. The media attention had gradually faded, which was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. Their story had served its purpose, raising awareness about animal rescue, inspiring conversations about chosen families, and ultimately helping to expose the criminal network that had terrorized Sarah. But the real victory was in the quiet moments. Tommy's first tooth, Guardian's patient submission to having his ears tugged by tiny fingers, Maggie's off-key lullabies that somehow always worked better than professional recordings. "Marcus," Hank called from the patio where he was assembling Tommy's new tricycle, "come help an old man with these instructions. I swear they're written in a foreign language." Working together on the tricycle, Marcus reflected on how much his definition of family had expanded. Hank had become the father figure he'd never had, offering wisdom earned through decades of life experience and military service. Their evening conversations on the porch had taught Marcus more about patience, resilience, and the importance of showing up every day than any parenting book ever could. "You know," Hank said as they attached the handlebars, "I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be putting together baby toys again. When my kids grew up and moved away, I figured that chapter of my life was closed." "Are you having second thoughts?" Marcus asked, only half joking. The arrangement had been temporary initially, but they had all grown so comfortable with their shared life that moving out seemed impossible to imagine. "Hell no," Hank replied with characteristic directness. "This old house needed children's laughter again. I needed children's laughter again." Sometimes the best gifts are the ones you never knew you were missing. Dr. Crawford had become more than Tommy's pediatrician. She was the keeper of Sarah's memory, sharing stories about Tommy's mother that helped Marcus understand the woman he had loved but never fully known. Through Elizabeth, he learned about Sarah's childhood dreams of becoming a teacher, her love of astronomy, her habit of talking to stray cats as if they understood every word. "She would have been an amazing mother," Elizabeth often said. "But I think she would be proud of the mother figures Tommy has found in Maggie and me. Sarah always believed that children needed a whole community to raise them properly." The legal aftermath of Vincent Hayes' arrest had revealed the full scope of his crimes. Beyond his abuse of Sarah, investigators discovered he had been operating a network of manipulation and control involving multiple young women who had aged out of the foster system. Tommy's case had provided the evidence needed to bring down an entire predatory organization, ensuring that other vulnerable young people would be protected from similar exploitation. Carol Hendricks, faced with overwhelming evidence of her complicity, had ultimately provided testimony that helped convict not just Hayes but several other members of his network. Her cooperation had been motivated partly by guilt and partly by self-preservation. But the results were undeniable. Children who might have been victimized were now safe, and families like Marcus's could live without fear of manipulation masquerading as legal challenges. As the birthday party wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus found himself alone with Tommy and Guardian in the living room. The 1-year-old was exhausted from all the attention and new experiences, falling asleep against Guardian's warm flank while the dog maintained his vigilant but relaxed watch. "We did it, buddy," Marcus whispered to Guardian, stroking the dog's head. "We kept him safe. We kept our promise to Sarah." Guardian's amber eyes met his with the same intelligence and depth that had first captured Marcus's attention in the rubble, but now they held something new: peace, satisfaction, the contentment of a mission completed and a family preserved. The dog's tail thumped once against the floor, a quiet acknowledgment of their shared journey from tragedy to triumph. Tommy stirred in his sleep, his tiny hand grasping at Guardian's fur with the unconscious trust that had defined their relationship from the beginning. In that moment, Marcus could see Sarah in his son's features, the determined set of his jaw, the way his eyelashes curved, the stubborn cowlick that defied all attempts at grooming. "Your mom saved us all," Marcus murmured to his sleeping son. "She saved you by trusting Guardian. She saved Guardian by giving him a purpose, and she saved me by making me part of something bigger than myself." The house had settled into its evening quiet, but it was the comfortable silence of a home filled with love rather than the empty silence of loneliness. Maggie was in the kitchen humming while she cleaned up the party dishes. Hank was on the porch, probably sharing his evening beer with the desert sunset. Elizabeth had gone home to her own family, but not before extracting promises for weekly dinners and regular updates on Tommy's development. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tommy's increasing mobility would require more vigilance. Guardian was showing the early signs of arthritis that would need management, and Marcus's growing business demanded more time away from home. But these were the problems of a functioning family, manageable complications that came with the territory of building a life together. As Marcus carefully lifted Tommy from Guardian's side and carried him to his crib, he thought about the letter from Sarah that he read every few months when doubt crept in. She had ended it with a request that had become his daily mission. Love him enough for both of us, but don't try to love him alone. Find the family he deserves, and let them help you become the father he needs. Standing in Tommy's nursery, watching his son sleep peacefully while Guardian settled onto his bed nearby, Marcus understood that Sarah's final gift hadn't just been their son's life. It had been the opportunity to discover what family really meant. Not just blood relations or legal obligations, but the conscious choice to show up for each other every day, to celebrate victories together and weather storms as a unit. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities that once seemed impossible. Tommy would grow up knowing he was chosen, protected, and celebrated by people who had made him the center of their world by choice rather than chance. Guardian would spend his remaining years not just as a pet, but as an honored member of a family that understood his sacrifice and cherished his loyalty. And Marcus would continue learning how to be the father Tommy deserved, guided by Sarah's memory and supported by a family that proved love could indeed be stronger than biology, circumstance, or even death itself. In the quiet of that March evening, surrounded by the gentle sounds of his sleeping household, Marcus finally understood that some stories don't end. They just transform into new beginnings. Sometimes life gives us second chances wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Marcus never imagined that one moment of looking into a dog's amber eyes would transform him from a man working 3 jobs just to survive into a father surrounded by the richest kind of family, one built on choice, not chance. Guardian's 6-month vigil in that collapsed building wasn't just about protecting a baby. It was about proving that love transcends species, circumstances, and even death itself. When Sarah made that final decision to trust her son's life to a German Shepherd, she created something beautiful, a family bound not by blood alone, but by the daily choice to show up for each other. Maggie found purpose again after retirement. Hank discovered that empty houses need children's laughter, and Marcus learned that being a father isn't about perfection. It's about commitment. Guardian taught them all that loyalty isn't blind devotion. It's the conscious decision to protect what matters most, even when the cost seems unbearable. Their story reminds us that families come in all shapes, that second chances often arrive disguised as disasters, and that sometimes the most meaningful connections happen when we least expect them. What unexpected relationship has brought the most joy to your life? Have you ever experienced a moment when everything changed because you chose to care about someone who needed you